The marble floor of Aleandro Castellano's study gleamed like ice beneath the October afternoon light, and in that perfect, polished whiteness sat two people who had no business being in the same room together. Mia Hartley stood with her back nearly touching the tall window that overlooked Boston's North End, a uniform wrinkled from a double shift at Ashford Manor, her hair escaping from a loose ponytail, and her eyes fixed on the man sitting behind a mahogany desk so large it seemed to swallow the air around it. Aleandro Castellano wore a charcoal suit that cost more than everything she owned, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his dark hair swept back from a face carved by power and something else, something that looked almost like grief. His grey eyes, storm-colored and penetrating, studied a document he was not actually reading. Neither of them heard the rifle shot at first. It was the sound of the glass, that terrible, cascading explosion, that changed everything in the space of a single heartbeat. The window behind Mia detonated inward, shards raining down like crystallized daggers, and she didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't calculate odds. Her body moved on pure instinct, pivoting and throwing herself forward across the 8 feet of marble floor toward the only person in the room who mattered in that moment. The bullet, a clean, efficient projectile meant to pierce the skull of a man who had ordered the deaths of far too many people to count, passed through the space where his head had been a fraction of a second before and buried itself in the leather chair behind him. Mia's body collided with his, and they crashed together to the ground, her shoulder screaming as the impact wrenched it forward. But that wasn't the real pain. That came a heartbeat later when she felt the hot punch of the second shot tearing through her upper shoulder blade, burning like a blade wrapped in fire, and the copper smell of her own blood blooming into the air like a terrible rose. She gasped. Aleandro's arms caught her as she collapsed, his hands that his men said had ordered destruction across 3 continents, suddenly gentle and desperate, turning her toward him. His eyes went wide, his jaw clenching so hard she could see the muscle spasm beneath his skin. "Get down," he commanded, but his voice wasn't aimed at her. It was for the men whose footsteps were already thundering through the mansion like an approaching storm. Bruno crashed through the study door first, his service weapon drawn, Theo right behind him, both men moving with the precision of soldiers. They froze, actually froze, weapons lowering, when they saw their boss on the cold marble floor with a bleeding woman cradled against his chest, her blood spreading across his white shirt like ink through paper. "Call an ambulance," Aleandro commanded, his voice steady now, solid like an oath. But his eyes never left Mia's face. "Who else is on the property?" "Security is sweeping the roofline," Bruno said, his shock beginning to crystallize into action. "2 shooters, maybe 3. We're locking down the perimeter." "I didn't," Mia's voice came out as barely a whisper, fractured like glass. "I didn't think about it. I just..." "Sure." Aleandro's hand moved to her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a tenderness that seemed impossible from a man of his power. "You're safe now. You're safe." But what Mia Hartley did not know, as she lay bleeding on the most expensive floor in Boston, was that this man had been searching for her for exactly 14 days. What she did not know was that the 6-year-old girl named Emma who lived in the east wing of this mansion, the little girl with dark curls and eyes like starlight, had spent her entire life believing that no one in the world would ever reach down and pull her out of the darkness. What she did not know was that Aleandro Castellano had burned an entire criminal empire to ash trying to find the person who had loved his daughter when the world wanted to destroy her. What she did not know was that her own life was about to transform in ways she could not yet imagine. The ambulance sirens were already wailing in the distance, their sound cutting through the October air like a knife through silence. Now, let us go back 3 days earlier, to the moment when Mia Hartley had exactly $34 to her name and the worst phone call of her life waiting to destroy what little hope remained. 3 days before the gunshot. 3 days before the marble floor. 3 days before everything changed. Mia Hartley counted the crumpled bills spread across her kitchen table, a table that was technically not hers, that belonged to the studio apartment she rented for $680 per month from a landlord who had stopped fixing things 6 months ago. The money was real. The bills were real. The desperation was real. $34. That was what remained after she had paid for her sister's medication, her work uniform dry cleaning, the rent that was due in 4 days, and the bare minimum groceries to keep herself functioning through the double shifts that had become her entire existence. Her phone sat next to the pile of money. Black. Silent. Waiting. It rang at 3:19 in the afternoon, and the moment she heard the doctor's voice on the other end of the line, she knew that the mathematics of survival had just become impossible. "Miss Hartley, I'm calling about your sister's cardiac evaluation," the voice said, clinical and kind in that way doctors learn when they have delivered bad news to terrified people 10,000 times. "The testing is complete. She requires surgery. Valve replacement. It's not optional. Without it, she has perhaps 6 months. With it, she has decades." Mia's fingers gripped the edge of the table. "How much?" $35,000. Your insurance will cover 70% if you can get her approved quickly. That leaves your family responsibility at approximately $9,800. But the surgery can't wait. She's deteriorating. I would need confirmation from you that you're moving forward within 3 days so I can schedule the operating room. 3 days. $35,000. $34 in her pocket. The math was not complicated. The math was catastrophic. "I understand," Mia whispered. "I'll find a way." She didn't know how. She didn't know where. But she knew that her sister, who had raised her after their mother died, who had worked 3 jobs to keep them housed and fed, who had sacrificed everything for a girl who had become a woman without ever having the chance to become anything else first, that sister was not going to die while Mia had breath left in her body. She hung up the phone and for exactly 43 seconds, she didn't move. She didn't cry. Her tears had been rationed so carefully over the past 6 years that there was almost nothing left to give. Instead, she picked up the bills, folded them into the pocket of her work jacket, and prepared for her shift at Ashford Manor. The nursing home where she worked paid minimum wage and where her manager Douglas Hale had somehow convinced himself that tips left by confused elderly residents belonged to him. The place smelled like antiseptic and sadness, and Margaret Harrington, the facility's owner, a woman with white blonde hair styled like a helmet and jewelry that clinked like a cash register when she walked, had made it clear that people like Mia existed only to be used and humiliated in equal measure. But Ashford Manor also had residents who were genuinely kind, who remembered her name even when their own names were beginning to slip away, and one very old woman named Mrs. Chen who always saved the chocolate from her dessert and gave it to Mia because she said, "You look like you need something sweet in your life, dear." Mia clocked in at 4 p.m., tied her apron, and began her shift. The evening moved like a tired animal, slow, heavy, each moment feeling heavier than the last. She delivered medications, changed bedding, sat with residents who couldn't sleep, listened to Mr. Patterson tell the same story about his daughter's wedding 4 times in a row without letting him know she had heard it before. She ate leftovers that were technically garbage because the residents hadn't finished their plates. She accepted the fact that her shoes had a hole in the sole and her socks were soaked. She thought about her sister lying in a hospital bed in Queens, waiting to hear if her little sister could find the impossible. At 10 p.m., Douglas Hale cornered her in the supply closet. She was reaching for clean linens when the door closed behind her, and his shadow filled the space like something toxic. He was a man of 47 with the voice of someone who had never heard the word no, and he smiled at her in the way that made her skin separate from her bones. "You know, Mia," he said, moving closer, his voice low and wet, "you could ask me for a raise. I could make your life a lot easier." She said nothing. She had learned that silence was sometimes the best exit strategy. "I've been very generous to you," he continued, and his hand reached toward her face. "The least you could do is show some gratitude." The moment suspended itself, held, stretched, expanded into something that felt like forever and also like a trigger that had already been pulled. And then Mia moved. She didn't think about it. Her hands came up, she shoved him backward, and she walked past him toward the door. Her voice, when it came, was steady even though her hands were shaking. "Don't ever touch me again." She finished her shift in the main hallway, avoiding the supply closet, avoiding Douglas, avoiding the weight of his anger that followed her like a shadow. She changed into her street clothes at 6 a.m., collected her $34, and walked out into the cold October morning with the terrible knowledge that she had just made her impossible situation worse. But she also had one more place she could go. One more place that had become her secret over the past 6 months. The Hope House shelter for children was located 4 blocks from the apartment she couldn't afford to keep. It was her one day off per week, her one place where the mathematics of survival didn't apply, her one place where she could be useful in ways that mattered beyond the simple exchange of money for survival. She had met Emma there 6 months ago, a 6-year-old with dark curls and eyes that held too much understanding of the world's cruelty. Emma had arrived at Hope House with bruises in various stages of healing and a voice so quiet you had to lean in to hear her speak. Mia had reached down. Mia had pulled her close. Mia had whispered to her in the dark, "You are not alone. I promise you, you are not alone." She didn't know that this promise, made in the darkness of a shelter, whispered to a child who belonged to the most dangerous man in New England, was going to change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. She didn't know that her hand, reaching down to lift a broken child out of the darkness, was about to set off a chain of events that would shake the foundation of everything she thought she understood about survival, about love, about what it means to be saved. She only knew that Emma was waiting for her, and that for now, that was enough. The fluorescent lights hummed above the break room table at Ashford Manor, a sound like insects trapped in plastic. Mia Hartley sat alone at 11 p.m., coins arranged in small stacks before her. Quarters. Dimes. Nickels. Pennies. The mathematics of survival reduced to metal. She counted again, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who has done this too many times. $34. Exactly. Her phone vibrated against the metal table. The screen showed a Boston number she recognized. St. Catherine's Treatment Center in Providence. Her heart stopped. She answered before the second ring finished. "Miss Hartley." A woman's voice, professional and measured. "This is Dr. Reeves calling about your sister's case. We're moving forward with the experimental protocol. The cost is $35,000. We need confirmation of payment and insurance within 3 business days, or we move to the next candidate on our list." Mia's hand trembled. 3 days. 3 days, Miss Hartley. After that, your sister moves to waiting list status. 6 months minimum. The line went dead. She stared at the coins. $34.95. The gap between 34 and 35,000 was not a number. It was an ocean. It was a locked door. It was the difference between her sister living and her sister becoming a permanent waiting list. Mia gathered the coins back into her purse, each one feeling heavier than before. The double shifts had started 6 months ago when the medical bills began arriving. Now they were her entire life, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Ashford Manor Nursing Home, then 3 p.m. to midnight cleaning residential homes across Boston. 12 hours of work for maybe $90 on a good day, before tips disappeared. She changed into her uniform for the second shift, the gray polo shirt and dark pants that made her invisible to the people whose homes she cleaned. Invisibility was useful. It meant they didn't watch you. It meant they didn't wonder why you were eating their leftover food in their kitchen at 3 in the afternoon. It meant you could exist in their spaces without really existing at all. The first shift at Ashford Manor was always the worst, though. Because Douglas Hale was there. He stood in the staff area at 1:53 p.m., mid-40s with thinning hair that he combed forward to hide the baldness. Coffee breath and small eyes. He was counting something in the tip jar when Mia walked past. A family had just left. Mrs. Chen's daughter had placed $40 on the nightstand specifically for Mia. She'd said so directly. "This is for you, Mia. Thank you for being so kind to my mother." Douglas's hand closed around those bills. He slid them into his wallet without looking away from Mia's face. "That was for me, Mr. Hale," she said quietly. "That's so." His smile was like a blade wrapped in ice. "Prove it." "Which room number?" She didn't answer. "That's what I thought." "Back to work, Hartley." She returned to stripping beds in the East Wing. Room 214. Room 215. Room 216. The hours stretched like pulled taffy. At 2 p.m. when her shift ended, she had made $48. Douglas had taken 60. The residential cleaning work was different. It was quiet. Dark homes where families had left for work. She moved through rooms with a bucket and cloth, invisible in the way that only service workers can be. But the money was worse. Some homes left tips. Most didn't. One woman in Back Bay had left a note, "Please do not touch the family photos. You may move them, but please do not look at them." Mia had looked at the photo. A family of 4 on a beach, smiling. The woman's husband with his arm around her. Children who would never know what it felt like to choose between eating and medicine. Around 4 p.m., during a cleaning job in a brownstone on Pinckney Street, Mia's stomach made a sound like an animal in distress. She had not eaten since the break room coffee at 6 a.m. She found leftover rotisserie chicken in the refrigerator and ate 3 pieces standing in a pantry closet, one hand against the wall for balance. The client returned home at 11 p.m. and did not notice her. Mia was finishing the kitchen when the woman walked through, already on her phone, already talking about drinks with friends. Mia did not exist in that woman's world. The woman did not see her. The woman never would. But there was one place where Mia was seen. Tuesday was her one day off. She had negotiated it fiercely with the residential cleaning company, sacrificing weekend overtime to keep Tuesday sacred. Tuesday meant the Sacred Heart Children's Shelter 4 blocks from her apartment, the apartment she could no longer afford, with the eviction notice taped to her door in official red letters. She had 7 days left before they changed the locks. The shelter smelled like flour and soap and something else, hope, maybe, though that was not really a smell. Mia had started volunteering there 8 months ago, after the medical bills became real. She needed to be around children who were less fortunate than herself. It was the only way she could survive the knowledge that she was drowning. She could help them float. That was something. Emma had arrived 6 weeks into Mia's volunteering. 6 years old with dark curls and eyes that held the weight of understanding no child should carry. Bruises in various stages of healing mapped across her small arms and legs. She did not speak English. She spoke Italian, fragmented and frightened, words tumbling out in whispers during the quiet hours. "Dov'è Mama? Where is Mama?" No one knew. Emma had been found wandering near the train station in the middle of the night. An officer had brought her in with a thermal blanket and a blank file. Missing person alert, nationality unclear, relatives unknown. Mia had pulled a chair next to Emma's cot and had simply sat there while the girl slept. She'd reached down and had brushed dark curls away from the child's forehead. In the morning, Emma had woken and had looked at her with such relief that Mia had felt something inside her crack open like an egg. Every Tuesday after that, Emma waited for her. By the 3rd Tuesday, the girl had taken Mia's hand and had whispered, barely audible, "Mama." Mia's eyes had flooded with tears she couldn't explain. "I'm not your mama, sweetheart. But I'm here. I'm going to be here every Tuesday. Promise?" The word was fragile as paper. "I promise." The October wind outside cut like a blade as Mia walked between jobs. Her jacket was too thin. The forecast had warned of an early frost. She had pulled her only sweater from the dryer at 5:45 a.m., still damp, and had worn it anyway. The cold bit through the fabric and into her bones. Her breath visible in small clouds. Her hands red and raw from cleaning chemicals. 2 jobs left tonight. Then home. Then she would lie awake calculating numbers that did not add up to 35,000. At 10:15 p.m., finishing the last residential job in Beacon Hill, Mia's phone vibrated in her pocket. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers meant debt collectors or worse. She answered anyway. A man's voice, controlled and measured, spoke from the other end. Not a collector. Something else. Something that made her heart stutter. "Miss Hartley? This is Marco Barnadetti. I work for Aleandro Castellano. We need you to come to an address in Beacon Hill. Tonight. It concerns a child named Emma. The phone nearly slipped from her fingers. How do you? There is a black SUV waiting outside your current location. Come now. The child needs you. The line went silent. Mia stepped outside onto the dark street. A vehicle waited, engine running, windows tinted black. A man in a dark suit stood beside the back door, patient as stone. She had $34 in her pocket and no idea that this moment would change the trajectory of her life forever. She had no idea that Emma belonged to the most dangerous man in New England. She had no idea that the next 72 hours would contain both the worst and the best things that could happen to a person who had spent so long simply trying to survive. She walked toward the black SUV anyway, because Emma was waiting, and Emma was the only thing in her world that still mattered. The black SUV pulled away from the curb at 11:33 p.m., and Mia sat in the back seat watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. Her hands trembled in her lap. The cold from the October night still clung to her jacket, and her breath came in small, shallow clouds. Bruno drove in silence, his broad shoulders filling the front seat, his hand steady on the wheel. Theo sat beside him, occasionally glancing at her in the rearview mirror with an expression she could not read. The radio crackled once, then fell silent. She should have told Aleandro. Every fiber of her body screamed that she should have told him about the call, about Douglas's threats, about the midnight deadline. But if she had told him, he would have protected her, and protection meant Emma might lose him again. Protection meant men in suits arriving at Ashford Manor with guns and questions and consequences. Protection meant the careful world she had built with that little girl over the past 2 days would collapse like a house made of paper. So instead, she had slipped out of the mansion at 11:19 p.m., leaving a note on her pillow that said nothing at all, and called the black SUV that arrived at her old apartment building like a phantom. She had given Bruno the address without explanation. He had not asked for one. The SUV turned onto Tremorne Street, where Ashford Manor rose against the dark sky like a monument to other people's suffering. The nursing home squatted on its corner lot, all Victorian brick and narrow windows and the faint hum of machines keeping dying people alive for a few more months. Mia had spent 6 months cleaning these halls, pushing residents in wheelchairs, listening to their stories, watching Douglas Hale pocket their family members' tips and smile like a man who had never stolen anything in his life. Bruno pulled the SUV into the service entrance and killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. Mia reached for the door handle. "Wait," Theo said from the front seat, his voice like gravel. "You should not go in there." Mia's hand froze. "What?" "Castellano would not want you here. Not at night. Not alone." "He doesn't know I'm here," Mia said quietly. The two men exchanged a look that lasted 3 full seconds. Then Bruno turned to face her, his neck thickening as he moved. "What is happening, Miss Hartley? Why would you leave the mansion in the middle of the night and come to this place?" Mia's throat tightened. "I need to settle something. Something from before. Before I can move forward with what's happening at the house. With Emma. With him." It was a half-truth, and both men seemed to know it. But Bruno nodded slowly, his jaw working beneath his skin like he was chewing on something he did not want to say. "Stay where we can see you," Theo said. "We will be right here." Mia climbed out of the SUV and walked toward the service entrance. The door was unlocked. It always was, because the nursing home operated 24 hours a day, and maintenance never stopped. She pulled it open and stepped into the dim hallway that smelled like disinfectant and something underneath it, something older and sadder. The storage room was in the basement, 3 flights down. She knew the way. She had walked it 100 times carrying mops and buckets and the weight of her own invisibility. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound like insects trapped in glass. Her sneakers echoed on the linoleum. The October cold had followed her inside, or perhaps the cold lived here permanently, in the bones of this building. Douglas was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He stood beside the storage room door with his arms crossed, wearing the same golf shirt he wore during day shifts, the same khakis, the same expression of entitlement that had made her skin crawl for 6 months. He was 53 years old but carried himself like a man still convinced of his own youth. Grey hair slicked back with gel. A wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. Eyes that had calculated the price of everything she owned and found it worthless. "There you are," he said, and smiled. "I was beginning to think you were not coming." "I'm here," Mia said. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Douglas laughed, a sound like something breaking. "I want you to remember who you are, Mia. You are a nobody. A woman with nothing. A woman who cleans other people's shit for minimum wage and could not save her own sister if her life depended on it. And then you walk out on me without notice, and suddenly I hear you are living in some mansion in Beacon Hill." He stepped closer. "Who is he? What are you doing?" "It is not your concern." "It is absolutely my concern," Douglas said, and his voice changed. The lightness drained out of it, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. "Because I know things about you, Mia. I know about your sister's treatment. I know about the fraud in her insurance paperwork. I know about the forged doctor's letters. And if you do not come back to work here, if you do not act like you are grateful for the job I gave you, then I will make one phone call to the Massachusetts Medical Board and everything falls apart." Mia's heart stopped. There was no fraud. But there were gaps in the paperwork, moments when she and her sister had tried to bypass insurance complications by letting a nurse at the treatment center sign off on claims they had not formally processed. It was not fraud. It was desperation. But in Douglas's hands, it could become anything. "You would not do that," she whispered. "I absolutely would," Douglas said. "Your sister's treatment gets revoked. She dies. And you will spend the next 3 years fighting charges that you cannot afford." He moved closer. "Now, are you going to come back to work, or are we done here?" The storage room door was directly behind him. Cleaning chemicals on metal shelves. Bleach and ammonia and industrial Streck soap. The smell of it filled the basement like a warning. Mia thought about Emma asleep in the guest room at Ashford Manor, her small hand tucked under her chin, finally safe. She thought about Aleandro standing in the nursery with his shoulders bent under the weight of his own failures. She thought about the $35,000 that had arrived in her sister's treatment account, a sum so impossible that it had taken her an hour to believe it was real. And then Douglas reached for her arm. His fingers closed around her wrist, hard enough to cut off circulation. His face came closer, and she could smell his breath, could feel the temperature of his skin, could understand in that moment that he had been waiting for this, planning for this, hungry for the moment when she would be trapped in this basement and completely alone. "You belong to me," he said. "You have always belonged to me. And you will do exactly." The basement door at the top of the stairs burst open. Bruno filled the frame like a wall of dark fabric and lethal intent. His footsteps were deliberate, measured, each one a hammer blow against the concrete stairs. Behind him came Theo, and behind Theo came 3 more men Mia had never seen before, all of them moving in unison, all of them radiating the kind of focused violence that made the air itself feel thin. Douglas released her wrist immediately. His face went the color of old paper. "Step away from her," Bruno said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a sentence. Douglas scrambled backward, his expensive khakis catching on the corner of a supply shelf. He raised his hands. "I don't know what this is about, but this woman is trespassing. I have every right to." "You have no rights," Theo said calmly. "You have less than nothing. You have the next 30 seconds to tell us every name, every account number, and every piece of information related to the money laundering operation you have been running out of Ashford Manor for the past 3 years. Or we will break your hands, and you will tell us anyway, and it will take much longer." Douglas's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. His eyes darted toward the stairs, toward the window, toward anything that looked like escape. "There is no operation," he said. "You are crazy. All of you are absolutely. Bruno moved forward 3 steps. It was not fast. It was not violent. It was simply inevitable, like gravity. Like the sun rising. Like consequence finally arriving after years of free passage. Douglas broke immediately. He sobbed as the words poured out. Every transaction. Every bribe to Margaret Harrington. Every resident's medication that had been mislabeled and resold on the streets. Every family member who had been overcharged for care that was never provided. 3 years of theft, 3 years of exploitation, 3 years of building wealth on the backs of dying people and their desperate families. Mia stood against the wall and watched him fall apart. Her wrist ached where he had grabbed her. Her heart was still racing. But underneath the fear, something else was happening. Something quiet and steady. Something like the ground becoming solid beneath her feet again. Bruno pulled out his phone and made a call. He said one word, found. Then he looked at Mia. We are taking you back to the mansion. Mr. Castellano is going to want to hear about this. The drive back through Boston took 20 minutes. The streets were empty at this hour, all midnight and October cold and the kind of silence that only exists in cities when everyone is sleeping. Mia sat in the back of the SUV with her arms wrapped around herself, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand how her life had shifted so completely in 72 hours. At 1:33 a.m., the black SUV pulled through the iron gates of Ashford Manor, and Aleandro Castellano was standing on the marble steps waiting for her. He was wearing a black cashmere coat that probably cost more than a year of her old salary. His salt and pepper hair was slightly disheveled, and his grey eyes burned with an emotion she had not seen in him before. Not anger. Something deeper. Something that looked like fear. He watched her climb out of the SUV, and then he crossed the distance between them in 4 strides and pulled her against his chest. His arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she might disappear. His hand came up to the back of her head, and she felt him breathing, felt the rapid beating of his heart against her cheek. Do not ever do that again, he said, and his voice cracked like old leather. Do not ever leave this house without telling me. Do not ever put yourself in danger like that. Do you understand me? Mia nodded against his chest. She could not speak. Could not explain why she had left, what she had been trying to protect. Could not do anything except stand there and let herself be held by the most dangerous man in New England, and feel, for the first time in her entire life, like she was not alone anymore. The marble floor of the Ashford Manor foyer stretched out like a pale ocean under the emergency lighting. It was 12:41 in the morning, and Mia Hartley was drowning on dry land. Blood dripped from a cut along her temple, each drop spreading into a dark halo against the white stone. Her breath came in ragged gasps that tore at her bruised throat, each inhalation a knife cutting through her chest. One eye had swollen shut, the socket blooming purple and black like a bruise on fruit left too long in the sun. Handprints wrapped around her neck in shades of crimson and violet, marks so vivid they looked painted on by a cruel artist. She couldn't stand. Her legs had simply given out, knees cracking against the cold floor. Her hands shook so violently she could barely see them through her good eye. Above her, the crystal chandelier spun slowly, its fragments catching the light like shattered stars, and she thought how beautiful it was, how she would never belong in a place this beautiful, how the world had a way of showing you exactly what you weren't allowed to have before taking it away. Every breath tasted like copper and failure. Douglas's words circled in her mind like vultures, your sister's treatment is under review for insurance fraud. By morning, she'll die. And it would be Mia's fault. She had tried to run. She had tried to escape. She had been stupid enough to believe she mattered to anyone, that her choices could change anything, that one person's desperation could outweigh the machinery of the powerful. The storage room at Ashford Manor had been freezing, fluorescent lights humming above shelves of cleaning supplies and mop buckets and the detritus of institutional care. Douglas had been waiting. His thin lips pulled back in something that wasn't quite a smile, his small eyes gleaming with a hunger that made her skin crawl. Margaret stood beside him in a fur coat that probably cost more than everything Mia had ever owned, her arms crossed, her expression distant and amused, like she was watching an insect struggle against glass. You made a mistake leaving, Hartley, Douglas had said, his voice slick as oil. I don't work for you anymore. Mia's voice had been steady then. She was proud of that. She had stood straight, chin up, even as her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. Margaret laughed. Sharp. Cruel. The sound of a woman who had never had to fear anything in her entire life. You think you can just walk away? You know too much. You've seen the books. The cash transfers. The resident fund discrepancies. Mia's stomach had dropped like a stone into dark water. I never looked at. Doesn't matter what you looked at, Margaret interrupted, her voice smooth as poison. Matters what we say you looked at. Matters what we tell the police you stole from us. Matters what we tell your sister's insurance company. Douglas moved closer, blocking the door. His presence filled the narrow space between the shelves like smoke. Here's what happens. You come back. You keep your mouth shut. You work until we don't need you anymore. And we forget this happened. Or you refuse, and we destroy you and your sister. You can't, Mia had started, but he was already talking. Already started. Made some calls. Your sister's treatment is under review for insurance fraud. Should be cancelled by morning. 48 hours after that, they'll discharge her. He stepped closer. His breath smelled like coffee and something rotten underneath. She'll die, Mia. Because of you. Because you thought you could be brave. The rage that flooded through her was bright and terrible and all-consuming. It burned through her fear like a flame through paper. She moved toward the door. Douglas grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the flesh above her elbow, and slammed her against the concrete wall. Her head cracked against stone. Stars exploded across her vision. He started shouting then, spittle flying, his face flushed with anger or adrenaline or the intoxicating rush of power over someone smaller. Margaret watched from across the room, unmoved, adjusting one of her diamond earrings like she was bored. Douglas's hands closed around Mia's throat. She couldn't breathe. The world narrowed to the pressure of his palms, the way her vision was darkening at the edges, the animal panic of her body screaming for air. She fought. Clawed. But he was stronger, his hands a vice, his breath hot against her face. She brought her knee up, connected with his groin. He stumbled back with a grunt of pain, his grip loosening just enough. She ran. Up the stairs. Through the hallway. Her throat screaming, one eye swelling shut from where his ring had caught her cheekbone. She didn't think about where she was going. Her body knew. The mansion. The only place that felt safe. The only place Aleandro Castellano lived. Now, on the marble floor of his foyer, with blood pooling beneath her and her body refusing to move, she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She closed her good eye. The cold pressed against her skin like a hand. One small thing stopped the darkness from swallowing her completely. Emma's voice from 2 days ago, whisper soft and trembling, "You make me feel safe, Miss Mia." The study door opened. Aleandro Castellano had been working at his desk, surrounded by documents and the blue glow of computer screens, when he heard something that made him go absolutely still. A sound like an animal in pain, but human. He was on his feet before he'd finished thinking about it, moving toward the foyer with the efficiency of a man who had learned long ago that hesitation could be fatal. What he found stopped his heart. Mia lay crumpled on the marble, her body a map of violence. Blood on white stone. One eye closed, swollen beyond recognition. Bruises in the shape of hands around her throat. And in the instant before everything else fell away, Aleandro saw something in his mind, his daughter asleep 3 floors above. Emma. The little girl whose entire world consisted of the people in this house, and specifically, the woman on the floor. He moved without thinking. Dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her injuries, afraid to touch her, afraid of causing more damage. His cashmere coat, the one that had cost $14,000, was already forgotten. His salt and pepper hair fell across his forehead as he looked down at her, and every scar on his body, every crime he had ever committed, every line on his face seemed to age another decade in a single moment. Who did this? His voice was so quiet it was terrifying. In 15 years of working for him, Bruno had heard Aleandro Castellano raise his voice perhaps 3 times. This was worse than shouting. This was the sound of a man who had just made a decision that would reshape the geography of Boston. Mia could barely speak through her swollen throat. Her voice came out fractured, barely a whisper. Douglas. Margaret. They said they'd cancel my sister's treatment. She'll die. That was all he needed. He lifted her in his arms like she weighed nothing, carried her to the study, and laid her on the leather couch. His hands were so gentle, so careful, and the contrast between the tenderness of his touch and the violence of his expression was so stark that she wanted to weep. He called his personal doctor with 3 words: emergency. Internal bleeding. Possible. Then he made another call. Bruno. Bring me everything on Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington. Everything. Bank records. Security footage. Phone logs. Every crime they have ever committed. I want it in 2 hours. Mia whispered, they'll destroy my sister's treatment. Aleandro kneeled beside the couch. He took her hand with a gentleness that made her chest ache in ways she couldn't name. His eyes, those storm grey eyes that had ordered men into graves, were burning with something different now. Something that looked like protection. No, he said. They won't. I promise you. At 2:15 a.m., the doctor arrived. Examined her. Declared, no internal bleeding, but severe contusions, possible concussion, soft tissue damage. Taped her ribs. Bandaged the cut on her temple. Gave her pain medication that made the world soft at the edges. At 2:22 a.m., while Mia drifted in and out of consciousness, Aleandro made a call that would change everything. Agent Chen? It's Castellano. I have information you need. The FBI arrived at 3:13 a.m. Agent Sarah Chen was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a notebook. She came with a team of 4 agents in dark windbreakers. Aleandro met them in his study, not the one where Mia lay sleeping, but another, smaller, lined with leather-bound books that he had never read. He handed her a folder. The folder was 2 inches thick. Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington have been laundering money through Ashford Manor for 3 years, he said, his voice steady as stone. Skimming from resident care funds. Using shell companies. I have bank records. Shell company documentation. Security footage of cash exchanges. Security footage of them destroying evidence. Phone records. Everything. Chen opened the folder. Her eyebrows rose. You're willing to? I'm willing to testify, Aleandro said. I'm also willing to give you my own financial crimes. My connections. My network. A complete controlled burn of information that gives you Douglas and Margaret while protecting my core operations. Non-negotiable. Chen stared at him. In 20 years of law enforcement, she had never had a crime boss walk in voluntarily with this much evidence. Why? Because, Aleandro said, and his voice was like a blade, they hurt someone I love. And death is too quick for them. Too easy. Too merciful. I want them to rot. I want them to spend 40 years in federal prison knowing that their entire world was destroyed by the woman they tried to threaten. Chen made the call. At 5:27 a.m., while the sun was still an hour away from the horizon, tactical teams hit both locations simultaneously. Flashbang grenades at Ashford Manor. Shouts of FBI echoing through hallways where elderly residents slept. Agents moving like ghosts through corridors, their footsteps silent on carpeted floors. Douglas Hale was in his office, shredding documents, when they came through the door. He saw the black windbreakers and the weapons and the authority written across their faces, and something inside him simply broke. His knees buckled. His hand started shaking like he was standing in a hurricane. He collapsed to the floor. "Please, please, I can explain," he begged, his voice fracturing. "I have money. I can pay. Please." Agent Chen read his rights while agents cuffed him. "Douglas Hale, you're under arrest for money laundering, fraud, embezzlement, and assault." Meanwhile, across the city in Margaret Harrington's penthouse on Beacon Hill, a different kind of violence was happening. Not physical. Worse. Systematic. Margaret was dragged from her bedroom in a silk robe and diamond earrings, her perfect composure cracking like ice in spring. She screamed at the agents, her voice sharp enough to shatter glass, "Do you know who I am? My lawyer will have your badges." Chen smiled. Cold. Precise. "Your lawyer is already under investigation for helping you set up the shell companies. You're going to federal prison for 40 years, Mrs. Harrington." The color drained from Margaret's face like someone had pulled a plug. She started to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Agent Chen cuffed her with her own hands. Both of them were led out in handcuffs as dawn broke over Boston. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing every moment. The footage played on every screen in the city by 6:13 a.m. Wealthy socialite and care home manager arrested in massive fraud scheme. By 8 a.m., 40 million people had seen it. By noon, every news outlet in the country had run the story. By the end of the week, it was a case study in federal crime that would be taught in law schools. 40-year sentences. Federal prison. The complete systematic destruction of two people who had believed themselves untouchable. Back at the mansion, Mia woke at 9:34 a.m. to find Aleandro sitting in a chair beside the couch, watching her sleep. He hadn't slept. His shirt was still half unbuttoned from the night before. His eyes were exhausted but burning with something fierce. "Emma," Mia whispered, panic rising in her chest. "Is she safe?" Aleandro said. "Sleeping. She doesn't know anything happened." Mia's hand found his. And in that moment, as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting everything gold, she began to understand that her life, the old one, the small one, the one where she was invisible, was over. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. 1 week had passed since the night everything shattered and reformed. Mia sat on the library couch at Ashford Manor. No, not Ashford Manor anymore. She would never set foot in that place again. She sat on the library couch at the Castellano mansion, her fingers tracing the edges of a picture book while Emma leaned against her shoulder, pointing at a rabbit with one chubby finger. The bruises on Mia's throat had faded to soft yellow-green, like watercolor paint bleeding into skin. She could swallow without pain now. She could speak without her voice breaking like fractured glass. The October light streaming through the tall windows was the color of honey. Emma turned a page. "Read this part, Mama." The word landed like a prayer answered. "Mama." Footsteps crossed the marble floor, deliberate, measured, the walk of a man who owned every room he entered. Aleandro appeared in the doorway with a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses, a briefcase tucked under one arm like a shield. The lawyer's name was Harrison Chen, and he carried documents that would change everything about who Mia was allowed to be. "Miss Hartley," the lawyer said, extending a folder bound in cream-colored leather. "These are the guardianship papers. Joint custody, with full legal authority over Emma's medical decisions, educational choices, and day-to-day care." Mia's hands froze mid-page. "What?" The word came out fractured. Aleandro settled into the chair across from them, his grey eyes soft in a way his face was not built to achieve. "Emma needs stability. She needs someone who loves her without condition. You already are that person. These documents make it official." Emma looked up, confusion blooming across her small face. "Does this mean Miss Mia stays?" "It means," Aleandro said, "that Miss Mia is your mama now. If she wants to be." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. 27 seconds passed. 28. Mia's eyes found Emma's. The child's bottom lip trembled. Really? Really, sweetheart? Mia's voice broke like thin ice. I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere. Emma launched herself at Mia with the full force of a 6-year-old's joy, wrapping her arms around Mia's neck so tight it nearly cut off her breath. For a moment, Mia couldn't speak. She could only hold this child who had been sold to traffickers, who had survived the unsurvivable, and now she belonged to someone who would die before letting her go again. The lawyer shifted his weight. If you're ready, Miss Hartley, I'll need your signature on 3 separate documents. This first one establishes you as primary guardian. The second grants medical power of attorney. The third, he opened his briefcase, producing a small velvet box, is something Mr. Castellano requested I deliver personally. Aleandro's expression remained unreadable. A man made of stone who had learned long ago not to show what he was feeling. Mia opened the box. Inside was a key, brass, heavy, old, and a bank card made of metal so pure it caught the light like captured sunlight. Her hands began to shake. The key opens every door in this house, Aleandro said quietly. You live here now. Not as a guest. As family. As someone who belongs. The card, the lawyer continued, has been activated with an initial deposit of $500,000. For anything you or Emma require. Housing, medical, education, living expenses. Everything. Mia couldn't speak. The numbers were too large. $500,000. She had lived her entire life counting coins, measuring milk into Emma's cup tablespoon by tablespoon, wearing clothes from the donation center at St. Catherine's. $500,000 was a number from someone else's life. Someone else's story. That's too much, she whispered. Aleandro stood and walked to the window, where the October wind was tearing dead leaves from the trees. He moved like a man carrying invisible weight. It is not nearly enough. He turned back to face her, and something in his expression shifted, a door opening that had been sealed shut for years. You saved my daughter before you ever took that bullet, he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. When she arrived at this mansion 2 weeks ago, she did not speak for 11 days. She would not eat. She would not let anyone touch her without flinching. She believed the world was nothing but cruelty and transaction. Then you came. You sat with her. You did not ask her to be brave. You did not tell her to forget. You just sat with her while she was broken, and you loved her anyway. You gave her safety when I had failed her in every possible way. He moved closer, each step deliberate. And then Douglas Hale put his hands on you in that storage room. He left marks on your throat like evidence of how easily he believed he could destroy you. And you walked into my office and collapsed on my floor, and something in me that I thought was dead forever came back to life. You did that. You saved me in every way that matters. Mia felt tears starting. She tried to blink them back, but they came anyway, hot and unstoppable. You saved me too, she said. From Douglas. From poverty. From believing I was nothing. I came to that mansion with $34 in my pocket and 3 days to find $35,000 and no way to find it. I came invisible. And you saw me. Aleandro's hand found hers. His fingers were rough, calloused, scarred, a map of violence and survival. He held her hand like it was precious. Like it was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. We are bound now, he said. You and I. Not by debt. Not by obligation. By choice. We chose each other when every instinct said to protect ourselves. That choice is everything. Emma tugged Mia's sleeve. Mama, can we make cookies? Mia laughed, the sound watery and bright, like rain on a sunny day. Yes, sweetheart. Let's make cookies. As Mia and Emma moved toward the kitchen, Aleandro watched them go. Bruno appeared beside him in the doorway, a man with the shoulders of a linebacker and the loyalty of a bloodhound. He whistled low, shaking his head. Boss, you're smiling. Am I? It's disturbing. But good. Very good. That night, Mia received a call from St. Mary's Medical Center. Her sister's experimental treatment was working. The prognosis was excellent. Remission was not guaranteed, but hope had moved from theoretical to real. Mia sat in her new bedroom, walls the color of cream, a four-poster bed draped in linen so soft it felt like being held, and let herself cry with relief. She reached for the photo she kept in her pocket, the edges worn soft by 1,000 moments of holding it. Her late husband, Marcus. Gone 3 years now. Construction accident. They had planned their whole lives together. They had dreamed of having children, of building a home where laughter lived in every room. Life had other plans. She whispered to his image in the photograph, "I'm going to be okay now. We're going to be okay. I found them, Marcus. I found the family we always wanted. And it's not what I imagined, but it's real. It's mine." She tucked the photo into a frame on her nightstand. Her new life, anchored by her old love. Through the open window, the Boston wind carried the first real cold of November. Winter was coming, but inside the mansion, everything was warm. Everything was safe. But one conversation remained unfinished. One question had not yet been asked. And neither Mia nor Aleandro knew that it would arrive at midnight on Christmas Eve, when the entire world was asleep and the snow had stopped falling, and a man would find himself on one knee holding a ring that cost more than a house, finally understanding that transformation was not something that happened to you, it was something you chose, every single day, by reaching for another hand when you were afraid. The real ending was still waiting. The best part of her story had not yet been written. And as Mia drifted to sleep that night, listening to the old mansion settle around her like a living thing, she could not have known that her life, the small one, the invisible one, the one where she was nobody, was already becoming legend. If this story moved your heart, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that transformation is possible, that one person's courage can change everything. Subscribe because tomorrow we are bringing you another story of justice, redemption, and second chances you will not want to miss. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever had someone reach out and change your entire life? What would you do if you had $34 and 3 days to save someone you loved? We will see you in the next one. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.